I saw this happen with a client who had spent years covering for her narcissistic boss's ethical violations. She had convinced herself it was loyalty, that protecting him was somehow noble, until the day he asked her to lie about financial misconduct that could hurt innocent people. Something broke open in her. "No," she said simply. When he cycled through the usual tactics, guilt, threats, flattery, she repeated one sentence: "This violates my values and I won't participate." She walked away from a six-figure job that day, but as she told me later, for the first time in years, she could look herself in the mirror with respect. When your moral compass reawakens, you become willing to accept almost any consequence rather than compromise your integrity again. And for a narcissist who depends on your ethical flexibility, this is the final nail in the coffin of their control. Supply severance. Let's talk about what happens energetically when an empath is truly done. This is where things get really interesting, and why narcissists often experience physical symptoms when they lose control over an empath. Narcissistic supply isn't just attention or admiration, it's life force energy. The more conscious or spiritually aware you are, the more potent your energy is to them. This is why narcissists often target highly intuitive, compassionate, spiritually connected people. You're not just supply, you're premium fuel. When you sever this energetic cord completely, not just physically leaving, but energetically reclaiming all parts of yourself, the narcissist experiences it as an existential threat, like oxygen suddenly being cut off. I've seen narcissists develop mysterious illnesses when a done empath finally reclaims their energy completely. I've witnessed them fall into deep depressions or experience anxiety attacks that nothing seems to cure. This isn't karma or spiritualist fantasy. It's the very real consequence of suddenly losing access to the energy source they've depended on. One client described the moment she energetically cut cords with her narcissistic ex as feeling like calling all parts of my soul back home. She did a simple ritual where she visualized gathering all her fragmented energy from the relationship and bringing it back into her body. Within days, her ex, who hadn't contacted her in months, reached out in a panic, claiming to be experiencing heart palpitations and couldn't sleep. He was desperate to see her, just to talk. Without realizing it, he was describing the symptoms of energetic withdrawal. This is perhaps why narcissists never really let go, even years later. Something in them recognizes that a piece of their life force is missing. That's why they hoover. Not because they miss you as a person, but because they miss your energy. When an empath fully reclaims their power, this energetic food source is permanently cut off. And for a narcissist, there is nothing more terrifying. Pattern recognition. The eighth transformation that makes a done empath dangerous to narcissists everywhere, not just the one they're dealing with, is their newly developed pattern recognition. Once an empath awakens, they develop an almost supernatural ability to spot narcissistic patterns instantly. Behaviors that might confuse others are immediately clear to them. Tactics that worked for decades become transparent strategies. This is why narcissists are right to fear a done empath, because we become walking, talking detection systems who can name their game in real time. We become truth tellers who can help others see what took us years to recognize. A client who had recovered from a narcissistic relationship told me about an experience at a work function. A new executive was working the room, and within 5 minutes of conversation, my client recognized the familiar pattern. Love bombing, subtle put-downs disguised as compliments, name-dropping and manufacturing false intimacy. In the past, she would have been drawn in by the charismatic performance. Now she simply smiled, excused herself, and later warned close colleagues to maintain strong boundaries with this person. 6 months later, those same colleagues thanked her as the executive's true nature was revealed through a pattern of workplace manipulation and taking credit for others' work. When enough empaths awaken to these patterns, narcissists lose their hunting grounds. Their tactics stop working. Their masks become visible. This is the ultimate threat a done empath poses, not just reclaiming their own power, but helping create a world where these manipulation tactics fail altogether. Identity liberation. The ninth and perhaps most profound transformation is the reclamation of your true identity. Most empaths in narcissistic relationships lose themselves so gradually they don't notice it happening. Your preferences morph to match theirs. Your boundaries dissolve. Your personality contracts to fill whatever space they allow. Even your perception of reality aligns with their distorted version. This identity erosion happens because narcissists need you to exist as an extension of themselves, not as an autonomous being with your own needs and truth. The liberation of your authentic self is perhaps the most beautiful part of this awakening. Suddenly, you remember who you were before the narcissist's influence. You rediscover passions you had set aside. You reconnect with parts of yourself that were suppressed to keep the peace. One client described this awakening as coming back online. After leaving a 10-year marriage to a narcissist, she found herself spontaneously singing again, something she had loved before being criticized into silence. She signed up for dance classes she had abandoned after being told she looked ridiculous. She reconnected with friends who had been gradually isolated from her life. "I'm not healing," she told me during a session. I'm remembering who I always was beneath the programming." This reclamation of self is what ultimately makes you immune to narcissistic manipulation forever. Because once you've reconnected with your authentic core, no amount of gaslighting can convince you to abandon yourself again. Future immunity. This brings us to the final reason a done empath is so threatening to a narcissist. You become permanently immune to their type. It's a common fear among narcissistic abuse survivors that you'll fall into the same pattern again, that you're somehow magnetically drawn to these personalities, doomed to repeat the cycle endlessly. But here's the truth that changed everything for me and thousands of clients I've worked with. Once an empath fully awakens, once they've done the deep healing work of reclaiming their energy, boundaries, reality, and identity, they become the worst possible target for future narcissists. The very qualities that made you vulnerable before, your openness, your willingness to see the best in others, your adaptability, your empathy, are now coupled with unshakable boundaries and razor-sharp discernment. You still have your beautiful empathic gifts, but now they're protected by an immune system that recognizes manipulation instantly. You can still see the wounded child in the narcissist, but you no longer feel compelled to heal them at your own expense. One client described this transformation perfectly. A year after leaving her narcissistic partner, she found herself on a date with someone new. Within 20 minutes, she noticed the subtle red flags, the slightly too personal questions, the calculated vulnerability designed to create false intimacy, the testing of her boundaries in small ways. In the past, these tactics would have worked perfectly. She would have opened up prematurely, overlooked the boundary violations as forwardness, and been drawn in by the artificial connection. Instead, she simply smiled, finished her coffee, and declined a second date. No drama, no need to expose or confront, just a calm recognition that this person wasn't safe for her energy. When enough empaths develop this immunity, narcissists lose their power collectively. Their manipulations stop working, their masks become visible immediately, their tactics fail. This is the ultimate threat a done empath poses to narcissistic abuse, not just reclaiming their own power, but creating a ripple effect that makes these manipulation strategies obsolete. Final wisdom. And now, the insight I promised you at the beginning, the one that changed everything for me and thousands of others who've made this journey. The moment an empath is truly done is not when they leave physically. It's not when they cut contact. It's not even when they stop loving the narcissist. The moment an empath is truly done is when they reclaim their power completely, when they make the uncompromising decision that their peace is non-negotiable. This decision changes everything because it shifts your primary commitment from pleasing others to honoring your truth, from external validation to internal worth, from fear-based reactions to soul-aligned choices. This is why the most dangerous person to a narcissist is an empath who's done, because a done empath has made a soul contract with themselves that cannot be broken by manipulation, guilt, or fear. They've remembered a truth so fundamental that no external force can shake it, that they are worthy of peace, respect, and authentic connection simply because they exist. The journey from empathic target to empowered truth-sayer isn't easy. It requires facing the wounds that made you vulnerable in the first place. It demands uprooting beliefs about love and worth that may have been planted generations ago in your lineage. I watched this happen with my client Miguel, who had spent years trying to prove his worth to a narcissistic father. Nothing was ever enough, not his academic achievements, not his career success, not his attempts to be the perfect son. Every accomplishment was either dismissed or claimed as a result of his father's superior guidance. The breaking point came at what should have been a moment of celebration. Miguel had just completed his doctorate after years of sacrifice. Instead of celebrating him, his father spent the entire dinner talking about how he would have gotten a doctorate himself if he hadn't sacrificed everything for his family. In the past, Miguel would have apologized somehow, tried to make his father feel important, diminished his own achievement. Instead, he looked at his father calmly and said, "I'm proud of myself. I worked hard for this. I'm going to enjoy this moment." The narcissistic rage that followed was epic, but for the first time, Miguel didn't absorb it. He didn't try to soothe his father's ego. He simply held space for his own accomplishment, regardless of his father's need to diminish it. This is what happens when an empath recognizes their intrinsic value. The narcissist's opinion suddenly becomes just that, one opinion, not the defining verdict on your worth. And without that leverage, their power crumbles. Manipulation immunity. The fourth transformation is perhaps the most powerful, developing immunity to manipulation tactics. One of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic abuse is how it conditions you to respond to certain triggers. Like Pavlov's dogs, you've been trained to react predictably to specific stimuli. They know exactly which words will devastate you, precisely which insecurities will send you into a spiral of proving yourself. I call these emotional buttons. And narcissists install them deliberately, then push them strategically whenever they need to regain control. Maybe it's the accusation that you're just like your mother when they know you fear becoming like a parent you struggled with. Maybe it's suggesting you're crazy or unstable when they know that's your deepest fear. Maybe it's threatening abandonment when they know you have unhealed rejection wounds. Whatever these buttons are, they've been programmed with surgical precision. And for years, you've responded exactly as designed, with fear, self-doubt, over-explaining, apologizing, or desperately trying to prove the accusation wrong. When an empath is done, these buttons no longer work. Not because you've removed them, but because you see them for what they are, manufactured levers designed to control your emotional state. I remember a client telling me about the moment she realized this. Her narcissistic partner had accused her of cheating, his go-to tactic whenever he wanted to distract from his own behavior or regain emotional control. In the past, she would have frantically defended herself, shown him message histories, even cut off friendships to prove her loyalty. This time, she simply said, "I'm not going to engage with that accusation." When he escalated, bringing up evidence and demanding explanations, she calmly repeated, "This isn't about infidelity. This is about control. I'm not participating." The narcissist was left sputtering, cycling through increasingly desperate tactics, none of which worked. Without her emotional reaction, the entire manipulation lost its power. This immunity develops as you start to recognize predictable patterns in their behavior. You begin to respond to the strategy behind their words rather than the content of the accusation itself. And in doing so, you render their entire manipulation system obsolete. Truth speaking, the fifth transformation that makes a done empath truly dangerous to a narcissist is perhaps the most threatening of all. You start speaking uncomfortable truths out loud. Narcissistic abuse thrives in silence. It depends on your willingness to protect the narcissist's false image, to keep their secrets, to maintain the facade they've so carefully constructed. Most empaths do this instinctively. We make excuses for their behavior. We hide our wounds. We downplay the abuse. They didn't mean it. They're just stressed. It's not as bad as it sounds. We become unwitting accomplices in our own gaslighting. When an empath is done, this protective silence ends. Not in a vindictive way, but in a clear, uncompromising commitment to reality. I'll never forget witnessing this shift in a group session I was facilitating. A woman who had spent decades protecting her mother's public image as the perfect parent while suffering horrific abuse behind closed doors finally reached her limit. When her mother called her in the middle of our session to deliver another guilt trip, instead of stepping out or speaking in coded language as she usually did, she calmly put the phone on speaker. "Mom, I'm in a therapy group right now and you're on speaker," she said clearly. "What you're saying right now is manipulative. You're trying to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. That's not going to work anymore." The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time in 40 years, the manipulation was exposed to the light. The private tactic was made public. The unspoken dynamic was given language. This is what terrifies narcissists most about a done empath, the prospect of exposure. Not necessarily public exposure, though they fear that too, but the exposure that comes from you simply refusing to participate in the fiction anymore, from naming manipulative tactics in real time, from declining to protect them from the consequences of their own behavior. Projection return, which brings us to the sixth transformation, the ability to return projections to sender. Projection is the narcissist's primary defensive weapon. Whatever they can't face in themselves, they project onto you. Their dishonesty becomes accusations of your untrustworthiness. Their emotional volatility becomes claims about your instability. Their inability to commit becomes fears about your fidelity. For years, you likely absorbed these projections as truths about yourself. You took on their emotional baggage as if it were yours to carry. You accepted blame for things that were never your responsibility. A done empath develops an almost supernatural ability to recognize projection and refuse to absorb it. They can stand in the middle of a narcissistic storm and identify exactly which accusations reveal the narcissist's own wounds and failings. One of the most powerful moments I witnessed was with a client who had spent years believing he was selfish because his narcissistic partner constantly accused him of not giving enough. Despite working 2 jobs to support her shopping addiction while she refused to work, despite sacrificing his own dreams and needs repeatedly, he had internalized the label of selfish. The turning point came during yet another argument where she was calling him self-centered. Instead of defending himself or trying harder, he paused, looked at her calmly and said, "I think you're describing yourself right now. This feels like projection and I'm not taking it on." The narcissist was stunned. For the first time, her projection had bounced back to her instead of being absorbed. Her primary defense mechanism had failed. This is what happens when an empath develops the ability to recognize and return projections. The narcissist suddenly has to face parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime disowning. And nothing is more threatening to their fragile self-concept. Conscience awakening. The 7th transformation that makes a done empath so dangerous to a narcissist is the awakening of your moral compass. Prolonged exposure to narcissistic abuse often dulls your ethical sensibilities. You find yourself participating in dynamics that violate your core values, lying to protect them, enabling harmful behaviors, ignoring red flags, even becoming harsh or manipulative yourself as a survival mechanism. When an empath awakens, they experience a profound moral recalibration. Behaviors you tolerated for years suddenly become absolutely unacceptable. Words that once wounded you now bounce off a shield of self-respect. This moral awakening is devastating to the narcissist's control because it places something above their demands, your integrity. When your commitment to truth, respect, and dignity becomes stronger than your fear of their reactions, the entire power dynamic collapses. The most dangerous person to a narcissist is an empath who's done. You know that moment when everything changes? That split second when something inside you just snaps, when all the pieces finally connect? I need you to stay until the very end today, because what I'm about to share might be the most important thing you hear about your relationship with narcissistic people. The final insight changed everything for thousands of others just like you. Silent power. This isn't just another video about narcissists. This is about what happens when an empath, someone who's absorbed years of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional warfare, finally wakes up. I've spent the last decade studying this exact pattern, talking to hundreds of empaths who reached their breaking point, and what I discovered terrified the psychological community. When an empath is done, truly done, they become the most dangerous person to a narcissist. Not dangerous in a physical way. Dangerous in a way that completely dismantles the narcissist's entire world. And I don't use the word dangerous lightly. The common narrative is that empaths are perpetual victims, that we're destined to keep attracting these emotional vampires because of some flaw in our wiring. But that's the greatest lie ever told to sensitive people. The truth is much more powerful. What makes a done empath so lethal to a narcissist's game isn't revenge, it's not hatred, it's something far more devastating, complete emotional sovereignty. When an empath reclaims their energy, their boundaries, and their reality, it's game over. The narcissist loses the one thing they need most: control over your emotional state. Invisible warfare. Let's back up and understand what's actually happening in this dynamic. Narcissists don't choose empaths randomly. They select us precisely because of our greatest strength, our capacity to feel deeply, our natural ability to care, to understand, to see the best in others. These beautiful qualities become weapons used against us. For years, I couldn't understand why I kept attracting the same type of person. Different face, same pattern. The devaluation would always come, no matter how much I gave, no matter how perfectly I showed up. It was like some invisible force kept pushing me toward people who would drain my light. What I didn't realize then, what most empaths don't see, is that this isn't coincidence. It's a deeply rooted energetic exchange that operates like a lock and key. The narcissist's emptiness seeks the empath's fullness. Their emotional hunger targets our emotional abundance. Think about your relationship with a narcissist. Remember how attentive they were at first? How they mirrored everything you loved? How they seemed to understand parts of you that no one else ever had? This isn't random. This is strategic acquisition of your energy. The narcissist studies you like a text they need to memorize. They watch how you respond to different approaches. They catalog your deepest insecurities and most cherished dreams. Not to connect with you, but to create the perfect custom-built cage for your specific soul. Truth awakening. Here's where everything changes. The moment an empath truly wakes up is the moment a narcissist feels their power begin to crumble. And this awakening isn't gentle. It's not some peaceful, gradual realization. For most empaths I've worked with, it comes after being pushed to an edge they didn't even know existed. Maybe it was the 100th lie you caught them in. Maybe it was watching them manipulate someone else you love. Maybe it was seeing the mask slip at just the right moment. Whatever that catalyst was, something fundamental shifted inside you. Your energy, the very thing they've been feeding on, suddenly becomes unavailable to them. This is why narcissists panic when they feel you disconnecting. This is why they launch into desperate attempts to hook you back in. Love bombing, threats, pity plays, smear campaigns. They'll use every tool in their arsenal because they can feel you slipping away. But here's what makes a done empath truly different. You're no longer playing the same game. While they're still trying to manipulate your emotions, you've stepped off that chessboard entirely, and this is precisely why it's so devastating to them. Energy reclamation. When you're entangled with a narcissist, you exist in a state of constant energy depletion. Think about it. How often do you feel exhausted after interacting with them? Like something essential has been drained from you. That's not just emotional fatigue, that's literally your life force being siphoned away. Narcissists create chaos specifically to feed off your emotional reactions. Your anger fuels them. Your confusion fuels them. Even your love and hope fuel them. Every strong emotion you experience in response to their behavior is energy they can absorb. This is why they provoke arguments out of nowhere, why they move goalposts constantly, why they build you up just to tear you down. The actual content of the fight doesn't matter to them, it's the emotional charge they're after. When an empath finally recognizes this pattern, everything changes. You start to see the bait for what it is. You notice how precisely they know which buttons to push. You realize that the entire relationship has been an elaborate energy extraction system. And this is when the true shift happens. When you stop responding emotionally to their provocations, you cut off their supply at its source. when you refuse to defend yourself against absurd accusations, when you don't rise to obvious bait, when you maintain emotional stability in the face of their chaos. This is what truly terrifies a narcissist: boundary mastery. Let me share something that happened with a client I'll call Sarah. After 12 years with a narcissistic partner who had convinced her she was too sensitive, too needy, and mentally unstable, Sarah reached her breaking point when she discovered he was living a double life. In the past, this would have destroyed her. She would have broken down, begged for explanations, fought for the relationship. But something different happened this time. As she sat across from him, listening to the same old lies, she felt a strange calm come over her. "I don't believe you," she said quietly. No drama, no tears, just a simple, neutral statement of fact. Her partner exploded. He cycled through rage, then tears, then promises, then threats, the entire narcissistic playbook in one conversation. But for the first time, Sarah didn't absorb any of it. She simply observed the performance with detached curiosity. "Your emotional reaction is not my responsibility," she told him before walking out. 6 simple words that ended 12 years of manipulation. What Sarah demonstrated was the first superpower of a done empath. Impenetrable boundaries, not just physical boundaries or time boundaries, but energetic boundaries. She refused to take on his emotions. She declined to accept responsibility for his feelings. She returned his projection to sender. For a narcissist, this is catastrophic. Their entire strategy depends on you having porous emotional boundaries. When those boundaries become solid, they have nowhere to dump their emotional waste, no way to make their internal chaos your problem. Reality anchoring. The second shift that happens with a done empath is even more threatening to a narcissist. You become immovable in your own reality. Gaslighting only works when you doubt your own perception. For years, you probably questioned your memories, your feelings, even your sanity. You learned to distrust yourself because contradicting their version of reality led to punishment. A narcissist needs you to be uncertain. Your self-doubt is the fertile ground where they plant their manipulations. But when an empath is done, that ground becomes concrete. I remember the exact moment this happened for me. After years of having my reality questioned, of being told I remembered things wrong or was too sensitive, something crystallized inside me. I looked at the person who was trying to convince me that I hadn't experienced what I clearly had, and I thought, this has nothing to do with the truth. This is about control. That single realization changed everything. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to convince. I simply held my reality as mine, regardless of their need to distort it. "That's not what happened, but I understand you need to believe that," I said calmly. The narcissist was stunned. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for the truth. I was simply living in it, without needing their validation or agreement. This is the second lethal blow to a narcissist's control system. When you stop participating in the alternate reality they've constructed, when you refuse to doubt your own experience, when their words no longer have the power to make you question your truth. Value recognition. Here's where the transformation goes even deeper. For an empath who's entangled with a narcissist, there's usually a fundamental belief operating beneath the surface. I need to earn love through usefulness. Most empaths grew up believing that their value was tied to what they could do for others, how well they could anticipate needs, how much pain they could absorb, how little space they could take up while still serving everyone around them. Narcissists exploit this belief masterfully. They train you to see your worth only through the lens of how well you meet their needs. They create a world where your sole purpose is to supply them with attention, admiration, and emotional regulation. The third shift that makes a done empath so dangerous is the recognition of inherent worth. When you finally understand that you don't need to earn your right to exist, that your value isn't tied to your usefulness to anyone, the narcissist loses perhaps their most powerful leverage,